Hello, I'm Rachel Henderson and welcome along to this video tutorial where you will learn how to make a super cheery smiley wall hanging. Now this is such a lovely recycling activity. It's a great way of using up those old, bobbly and slightly felted jumpers that are heading to the recycling bin. You'll learn how to needle, felt and punch wool tops into a base fabric, which is a technique called needle felt applique. I'll show you how to use a single felted needle and a sponge, and I'll explain how it all works and the best materials to use for this technique. I'll also show you on this video tutorial how to use a vanishing marker pen, which are one of my favourite tools, and they're great for all sorts of different craft projects. I assure you by the end of this tutorial you will have the needle felting bug and you'll want to go on and create more fun and colourful three-dimensional felted designs for your home. I really hope you enjoy this tutorial and I cannot wait to see your creations. For this project you will need an old knitted jumper that you no longer wish to use for wearing. The jumper will need to have at least 60% wool in it. The more wool the better. This technique works well if the jumper has been slightly felted in the wash already. By felted, I mean that the wool fibres in the knitted jumper fabric have been agitated and have binded to one another. If it hasn't been felted already, you can place your jumper inside a pillowcase, tie it at the top with an elastic band and place in your washing machine on a long hot cycle, along with some detergent. For extra agitation, you can add a pair of jeans or some large towels. Once the wash cycle is complete, transfer the jumper to the tumble dryer and leave to dry. I've used this technique various times now to make lots of different projects, and the best types of jumpers I've found that work well are merino and cashmere. You can check the inside label to find out what the jumper contains before starting the project. I'm going to be using dyed merino wool tops in this tutorial to felt the design into my fabric, which is a really soft and fine type of tops. You could also use corridale, which is the most popular type of tops for this type of project because it is a lot more coarser, therefore it takes less time to needle felt into your base fabric. To felt the wool fibres, you're going to use a felting needle and a sponge. There are lots of different types of needles for different thicknesses of wool. Some have just a few barbs on the end and some have a lot. The greater the number of barbs, the quicker the fibres will felt together. If you're using a merino wool, a fine wool tops, which is what I'm using in this tutorial, you normally use either a 38 or a 40 gauge needle. If you're using a coarser wool such as corridale, you would normally use either a 19 or a 36 gauge needle. In terms of your sponge, you can either buy a needle felting foam mat or you can simply use a large household sponge. As long as it is about 7 centimetres in thickness, it will work for this technique. You will need a glue gun and some glue sticks for attaching your fabric to your embroidery hoop. Make sure you have plenty of sticks to hand as they do run out really quickly. Also make sure that you switch your gun off every 20 minutes so that it doesn't get too hot and overheat. I've used a 9-inch embroidery hoop for this project. You will find these in most haberdashery stores. You might want to go for a smaller or larger one depending on where you're going to place your wall hanging. You will need a sharp pair of scissors. I recommend using ones that are suitable for fabric, as jumper fabric can be quite hard to cut at times. You will need a template to work from and a vanishing fabric marker pen. These are fantastic tools to use as they allow you to draw a design and then you can remove the ink afterwards. And lastly, you will need a sheet of felt fabric for the base of your design. Now I have used 100% wool felt fabric in this tutorial, but you could also use acrylic because it is going at the back of your design, so you're not going to see it, so it doesn't matter too much on the quality of the fabric. The first step for this project is to cut out your base fabric. You do this by placing the inside of the embroidery hoop onto the felt fabric and draw around it using your invisible marker pen. I use these pens a lot for craft projects. I actually like to call them magic pens, and the reason I love them so much is because you can trace around templates and then remove the ink afterwards. I'll show you how to do so later on in this tutorial. The next step is to cut out your jumper fabric and place it around your embroidery hoop. Lay it flat onto the table and place the inside of the embroidery hoop on top and roughly cut around it. Don't worry about it looking too neat at this moment in time. Give yourself enough excess fabric to work with, as you will need to bear in mind that the fabric will stretch when you place it inside your embroidery hoop. Now place the outer hoop under the jumper fabric and place the inner hoop inside. Make sure your fabric is nice and taut and not too baggy. It's now time to trace your smiley design. Referring to your template as a guide, trace the eyes and mouth onto your knitted fabric using your invisible marker pen. Take your time and remember that the ink can be easily removed if you make a mistake. The next step is to needle felt your design onto your jumper fabric, which is a technique called needle felt applique. The first thing you need to do is place your sponge underneath your fabric. Then gently pull your wool to create little tufts. Make sure these are loose and wispy. Holding your felted needle upright, start to punch the wool fibres into the design. Look at it as if you are colouring in, but instead of using a pencil, you're using wool. You will need to repeat this process, layering the wispy loose fibres and punching until you have completely filled in the design. When you punch wool fibres into a knitted fabric that has wool in it, the barbs on your needle catch the fibres in the knitted fabric and bind the wool and fabric fibres together. The wool in your tops is like your hair, if you like. There are lots of scales overlapping one another, so by stabbing and agitating it in this way, all of the fibres become entangled, and that's what we call felting. If you turn your jumper fabric over, you should see that lots of fibres have been punched right through to the back. Keep punching with your needle, and to test if you have punched enough, try pulling the fabric apart. If it comes apart easily, this means that you still have to punch it for a little longer. Turn the fabric over every so often and needle felt through the back. This helps to smooth out the needle felted applique design. If you have a 5 needle and needle punch tool at home, you could also use this to speed up the process and flatten the design even more. When creating the mouth design, create long, wispy and loose tufts of wool. Twist these together with your fingers and then lay these onto the design and punch into the fabric. Repeat until you have a solid mouth applique design. It's sometimes easier at this stage if you remove the fabric from the embroidery hoop and work in this way until you have completed the face design. The next step is to remove all of the ink outlines on your jumper fabric. You will do so by dabbing with a damp piece of kitchen roll. Now place the jumper fabric onto the small inner embroidery hoop and place the outer hoop on top. You will need to pull the fabric all the way around so that it is nice and taut. The next step is to turn your design onto the wrong side and cut all the way around the outer edge, leaving about 1 inch of jumper fabric for folding over. Apply small amounts of hot glue to the inside of the inner embroidery hoop and fold your jumper fabric over to attach. Do so all the way around. Once you have glued down your jumper fabric, trim away any excess fabric, being careful not to cut into your design. Pop your circular base felt fabric onto the back of your design so it fits nice and snug. And the last step is to attach a little loop of yarn about 2 centimeters in length to the top of your hoop so that you can hang it on your wall. And there you have it, a super cheery wall hanging that will be sure to brighten up your gallery wall. Here are some other fantastic designs you can create with wool tops and felting needles. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial, and please tag @Rachel Henderson Studio if you decide to share your makes. Happy crafting!